Today we are going to talk about something that should genuinely disturb you. Not because it involves a celebrity feud, although it does. Not because it involves Meghan Markle, although inevitably she lurks in the background of this story like a shadow that never quite leaves the room. No, this should disturb you because it involves the exploitation of a charity. A charity for children. African children. Some of the most vulnerable human beings on the face of this earth. And Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, sixth in line to the British throne, the self-appointed champion of compassion and mental health awareness, appears to have used that charity as a weapon of personal revenge. If you ever did, before we get into the ugliness, and believe me, it gets ugly, let's establish who we're talking about. Dr. Sophie is not some tabloid creation. She is not a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind. She's a highly accomplished professional, a medical doctor by training, a diversity and inclusion advocate, a woman who has sat on the boards of major organizations and brought genuine expertise to every table she has joined. She is also, and this is rather important, a woman of Zimbabwean heritage who has dedicated significant portions of her career to African development, to healthcare, to lifting up communities that the world too often forgets. In other words, she's exactly the kind of person you would want on the board of a charity like Centerbail. Let's talk about Centerbail. Founded in 2006 by Prince Harry and Prince Siyaza of Lesotho, Centerbail was created with a genuinely noble purpose: to support children and young people affected by HIV and AIDS in Southern Africa, particularly in Lesotho and Botswana. The name itself means forget-me-not in the Sesotho language, a poignant reminder that these children exist, that they matter, that they should not be invisible. And for years the charity did important work. It raised millions, it built programs, it gave hope to children who had precious little of it. Dr. Shandoka joined the board to contribute her expertise, her connections, her genuine passion for African development. She wasn't there for the glamour. She wasn't there to be photographed next to Prince. She was there because she believed in the mission. And then she made a fatal mistake. She asked questions. Now, in any properly governed charity, asking questions about financial records isn't just acceptable, it is a legal and moral obligation. Board members have a fiduciary duty to understand how donor money is being spent. They have a responsibility to ensure that funds are reaching the intended beneficiaries. They are, in the most fundamental sense, guardians of the charity's integrity. Dr. Shandoka, by all accounts, took this responsibility seriously. She wanted to understand the financial flows. She wanted to see the records. She wanted to know, as any competent board member should, whether the money donated by well-meaning people around the world was actually reaching the children it was supposed to help. And here is where the story takes a turn that should make every single person watching this deeply uncomfortable. Because rather than being thanked for her diligence, rather than being praised for doing exactly what a board member is supposed to do, Dr. Shandoka found herself on the wrong side of Prince Harry. Reports indicate that she was effectively pushed out, removed, fired, if we're being blunt about it. And the timing of her departure raised eyebrows that have not yet come back down. Because it didn't happen in isolation. It happened in the context of what multiple sources have described as a broader pattern. A pattern in which anyone who challenges Prince Harry, anyone who questions the way things are being run, anyone who fails to fall in line with the narrative that Harry and his inner circle wish to project, simply disappears, not literally of course. This isn't that kind of story, but professionally, reputationally, they are made to vanish, their contributions are erased. Their concerns are dismissed, and they are left standing outside the castle walls, wondering what just happened. Sound familiar? It should, because it is exactly the same pattern we have seen play out again and again and again in the world of Harry and Meghan. Now, I promised you Meghan Markle would make an appearance in this story, and here she is. Not because I'm dragging her into it for clicks, though I'm sure the comment section will have its own views on that, but because the timeline matters. Dr. Shandoka's difficulties with the Centerbail organization did not occur in a vacuum. They occurred during a period in which multiple individuals associated with the Sussexes found themselves on the receiving end of what can only be described as professional consequences for personal disagreements. We have seen this pattern before with staff members at Kensington Palace. We have seen it with longtime royal aides who were reportedly reduced to tears. We have seen it with individuals who, having worked closely with the Duchess of Sussex, found themselves discarded the moment they became inconvenient. The word that keeps coming up again and again from people who have been inside the Sussex operation is this: control, not collaboration, not consultation, not the kind of open, transparent, accountable governance that you would expect from people who never stop talking about how much they value openness and authenticity. Control. And in the case of Dr. Shandoka, that control appears to have extended to the governance of a charity for orphaned children in Africa. Let that sink in for a moment. A woman tried to ensure that money was being properly spent on vulnerable children, and she was removed for it. If that doesn't make your blood boil, I genuinely don't know what will. Let's call this what it is. This wasn't a disagreement about strategy. This wasn't a difference of opinion about the charity's direction. This wasn't even a personality clash, although I'm sure that's how it will be spun by the Sussex PR machine, which, let's be honest, operates with all the subtlety of a foghorn in a library. This was revenge, pure petty vindictive revenge. And the sickening irony, the absolutely gut-wrenching irony, is that it was carried out through a charity that bears the name Forget-Me-Not. A charity that was supposed to be about remembering the forgotten, about lifting up the voiceless, about putting vulnerable children ahead of personal ego. Instead, it became a vehicle for one man's vanity, a tool for settling scores, a mechanism through which Prince Harry could exercise the one thing he seems to value above all else, the power to punish anyone who dares to hold him accountable. And let us be crystal clear about the nature of the alleged punishment. Reports suggest that beyond Dr. Shandoka's removal, there were also questions about whether donations were being withheld from Centervale. Not because the charity didn't need the money, not because the children didn't need the support, but because the personal dynamics had become so toxic, so consumed by ego and spite, that the actual mission of the organization had become secondary. Secondary to what, you ask? Secondary to Harry's feelings, secondary to Harry's pride. Secondary to the narrative that Harry and those around him wish to maintain, a narrative in which he is always the hero, always the victim, always the one who is being treated unfairly by a cruel and unfeeling world, even when the people he's hurting are orphaned children in Lesotho. I want to pause here and ask a question that I think deserves serious consideration. Who is Prince Harry? Not the tabloid caricature, not the Netflix version. Not the spare memoir protagonist who wants you to believe he's a misunderstood warrior poet trapped in a golden cage. Who is the actual man? Because if the Centervale situation tells us anything, and I believe it tells us a great deal, it is that the real Prince Harry is not the compassionate, brave, truth-telling revolutionary he has marketed himself as. The real Prince Harry is shallow, self-centered, self-indulgent. And when crossed, obnoxious in the most dangerous way possible, because his obnoxiousness doesn't just manifest as rudeness at a dinner party. It manifests as the destruction of professional reputations, as the weaponization of charitable organizations, as the willingness to let vulnerable children suffer because his ego has been bruised. That is not compassion. That is not leadership. That is not the behavior of someone who deserves the platform, the privilege, and the public goodwill that he has spent his entire life receiving. That is the behavior of a man who has been told, yes, so many times by so many people for so many years, that the first time someone says, actually, let me see the accounts, he experiences it as an act of war, and he responds accordingly. Now, here's the thing that I think Harry and his advisors, and I use the term advisors very loosely, because whoever is advising him appears to be doing so with all the strategic brilliance of someone navigating with a map of the wrong country. Here's the thing they don't seem to understand. The public sees through this. The public has been watching with increasing horror as Prince Harry has systematically alienated every institution, every individual, and every relationship that once defined his life. His family, his country, his military comrades, his childhood friends, his staff, his charity partners, one by one they've all been cast aside. And at some point, and I think we've reached that point, the reasonable observer has to ask, if everyone around you is the problem, is it possible that you are the problem? The response to the Shandoka situation has been overwhelmingly negative. And not just from the usual royal commentators, not just from people like me who have been raising these concerns for years, from ordinary people, from charity sector professionals, from governance experts who understand that what allegedly happened at Centerville represents a fundamental violation of everything a charitable organization is supposed to stand for. The public appalls him, I'm told, and frankly, the feeling is mutual. Because Prince Harry's behavior in this matter is appalling. There is no other word for it, and let's not forget, because this is absolutely critical, the financial questions that Dr. Shandoka reportedly raised have not gone away simply because she was removed from the board. If anything, her removal has amplified those questions 1,000-fold, because here is what every donor to Centerville deserves to know. Where did the money go? How much of every pound, every dollar, every euro donated in good faith actually reached the children in Lesotho and Botswana? How much was spent on administration, on travel, on the kind of lavish events that generate wonderful photo opportunities for a prince who needs to maintain his public image? These are not impertinent questions. These are not hostile questions. These are the questions that any functioning charity should be able to answer without hesitation, without defensiveness, and certainly without firing the person who asked them. The fact that Dr. Shandoka's inquiries were apparently met not with transparency, but with retribution tells you everything you need to know about the governance culture within Centerville under Prince Harry's influence. And it raises a much larger question, one that regulators, donors, and the public should be asking with increasing urgency. Is Centerville being run for the benefit of vulnerable children in Africa? Or is it being run for the benefit of Prince Harry's brand? Because if it's the latter, and the evidence is becoming harder and harder to ignore, then every single person who has ever donated to that charity has been betrayed. Not by Dr. Shandoka, who tried to do the right thing, but by the prince who was supposed to be its champion. I want to zoom out for a moment because this story doesn't exist in isolation. It is part of a pattern so consistent, so predictable that you could set your watch by it. Prince Harry enters a relationship, personal, professional, institutional. For a time, everything is wonderful. The partnership is celebrated. The mutual benefits are extolled. Harry is praised for his compassion, his vision, his commitment. And then inevitably something goes wrong. Someone asks an inconvenient question. Someone fails to show sufficient deference. Someone has the temerity to suggest that perhaps things aren't being handled as well as they could be. And what happens next is always the same. The person is marginalized, then they're pushed out. Then if they dare to speak publicly about their experience, they're discredited. Their motives are questioned. Their character is attacked. And the Sussex machine moves on to the next partnership, the next organization, the next set of people who haven't yet learned what happens when you fail to genuflect. We saw it with the royal family. We saw it with the palace staff. We saw it with Spotify. We saw it with the various organizations that have been associated with the Sussex brand. And now we're seeing it with Centerville. The pattern is unmistakable, and it is damning. So what should happen now? The Charity Commission should take a very close look at Centerville's governance and financial records. Not because Dr. Shandoka said so, although her concerns should absolutely be taken seriously, but because the manner in which she was removed raises serious questions about whether the charity is being governed in accordance with its legal obligations. Donors should demand answers. If you have ever given money to Centerville, you have every right to know how it was spent. And if the charity cannot or will not provide those answers, you should draw your own conclusions. And the public should stop giving Prince Harry the benefit of the doubt. I know that's harsh. I know there are people watching this who still remember the little boy walking behind his mother's coffin, and who feel a residual sympathy for the man he became. I understand that. I share it to some extent, but sympathy has its limits. And when a grown man in his 40s uses a children's charity as an instrument of personal vengeance, sympathy must give way to accountability. Prince Harry is not a child anymore. He is not a victim. He is a wealthy, privileged, influential man who has made a series of choices, and those choices have consequences that extend far beyond his own comfort and reputation. They extend to the children in Lesotho who depend on Centerville. They extend to the donors who gave in good faith. They extend to Dr. Sophie Shandorka, whose professional reputation was put at risk because she dared to do her job. And they extend to all of us who believe that charitable organizations should serve the vulnerable, not the vanity of a prince. I want to leave you with this thought. There is a word in the Sesotho language, Centerville, that means forget-me-not. Prince Harry chose that name for a reason. He wanted the world to remember the children of Lesotho. He wanted us to not forget them. And yet, in his pursuit of control, in his appetite for revenge, in his determination to silence anyone who questions his authority, he has done precisely what that name begs us not to do. He has forgotten them. He has put his ego ahead of their welfare, his pride ahead of their futures, his need to win ahead of their need to survive. And that, more than anything else, more than the Netflix deals, more than the memoir, more than the interviews, more than the lawsuits, more than the endless, exhausting psychodrama of the Sussex saga, that is the true measure of who Prince Harry has become: shallow, self-centered, self-indulgent, obnoxious. Dr. Sophie Shandorka is a woman of formidable accomplishment. She carries her professional credentials not as ornaments but as tools. Tools she has used in service of communities that need advocates in positions of influence. Her heritage connects her directly to Africa. Her career has taken her to the highest levels of corporate governance. She is exactly the kind of person who should be sitting on the board of a charity like Centerville, not as a figurehead, not as a diversity box to be checked, but as a genuine steward of the organization's integrity and purpose. And Centerville, for those who need reminding, is a charity that Prince Harry co-founded back in 2006 alongside Prince Siya's of Lesotho. The name Centerville comes from the Sesotho language and translates as forget-me-not. It was named in memory of both princes' mothers. For Harry, it was a tribute to Princess Diana and her own deep commitment to HIV and AIDS awareness. A period of time, it seemed like one of the most genuine things Harry had ever done. A real legacy, a real contribution, something that would outlast the headlines and the drama and the endless soap opera of royal life. And now look at what it has become. Because here is what we know, or at least what the evidence strongly suggests. Dr. Shandorka, in the course of performing her duties as a board member, raised concerns about Centerville's financial records. She wanted transparency. She wanted accountability. She wanted the kind of clear, documented evidence that donor money was reaching the people it was intended for. These are not radical demands. These are baseline requirements of charitable governance. The Charity Commission expects nothing less. Donors deserve nothing less. And the children of Lesotho and Botswana, who have no voice in any boardroom anywhere, deserve nothing less. Instead of receiving answers, she received consequences. She was removed, pushed out. The official language will be careful and loyally. It always is in these situations. But the reality is not difficult to read between those carefully chosen lines. A woman who asked uncomfortable questions found herself on the outside looking in. And the timing, the manner, and the broader context of her departure all point in the same direction, toward Harry. Now I anticipate that some of you are already composing your responses. You're thinking, where's the proof? Where's the smoking gun? And it's a fair challenge, because we live in an age where accusations are cheap and evidence is everything. So let me be precise about what I am saying and what I am not saying. I am not saying that Prince Harry sat in a room and issued a direct order to remove Dr. Shandorka in those exact terms. I am saying that the culture of an organization flows from the top. I am saying that the governance failures at Centerville, and there appear to be significant ones, occurred on his watch, under his influence, within an organization that bears his personal stamp on every aspect of its public identity. I am saying that when a board member is removed after raising financial concerns, and that removal appears to serve the interests of the person at the top rather than the mission at the bottom, then the person at the top has questions to answer. And Harry, conspicuously, does not appear to be in the answering business. What he appears to be in is the grievance business, the victimhood business, the extraordinarily lucrative business of positioning himself as the most persecuted prince in the history of the British monarchy, a claim that would be laughable if so many people weren't still buying it. Think about the audacity of this. Think about the sheer, breathtaking audacity required to spend 5 years telling the world that you left the royal family because you couldn't bear the lack of transparency, because the institution was corrupt, because the people around you prioritized image over truth, power over principle, control over compassion. You wrote a book about it. You made a documentary series about it. You sat across from Oprah Winfrey and you actually wept, about the suffocating culture of an institution that refused to be held accountable. And then you run a charity the same way. The irony isn't just rich, it is positively dripping. It is the kind of irony that would embarrass a novelist for being too on the nose, because what Prince Harry has built in his post-royal life is not the liberated, authentic, values-driven existence he promised us. What he has built is a smaller version of exactly the same thing he claims to have escaped. A court in the medieval sense of the word, a tight inner circle of loyalists, a culture of deference and control, and a swift, merciless response for anyone who steps out of line. The only difference is that the palace he left had centuries of institutional infrastructure, parliamentary oversight, public scrutiny, and the moderating influence of an entire family and a constitutional monarchy to keep any one person's worst impulses in check. Harry has none of that now. He answers to no one. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where it gets genuinely dangerous. Because a man of significant wealth, global platform, and demonstrated willingness to use every tool at his disposal to destroy those who challenge him. That man, operating without checks, without institutional constraints, without anyone around him willing or able to say, "No, Harry, you cannot do this," is a man who will keep doing exactly what he is doing to Dr. Sophie over and over again, to whoever is next. Let us also talk about the money. Because we cannot have this conversation honestly without talking about the money. Reports have surfaced suggesting that donations owed to Centerbell may have been withheld. Not because the charity was under investigation, not because there was some legitimate administrative delay, but because of the personal fallout surrounding Dr. Shandorker's departure and the broader dysfunction within the organization's leadership. Read that again, if you need to. Donations withheld from a charity for children with HIV and AIDS because of personal spite, because somebody's feelings were hurt, because the prince who named his charity, Forget-Me-Not, apparently forgot quite thoroughly and quite conveniently that there are actual children depending on that money. Children in communities where a withheld donation doesn't mean a delayed luxury. It means a missed meal, a missed medication, a missed chance at a future that poverty and disease are already conspiring to steal from them. If that is what happened, and I want to be clear that investigations are ongoing, then there is no register of condemnation strong enough for what Prince Harry has done. None. You can dress it up in whatever language you like. You can hide it behind lawyers and press releases, and the careful architecture of a public image that his team works around the clock to maintain. But the underlying reality is this. Children suffered because a prince was angry, and he isn't even embarrassed about it. That's what strikes me most, watching this unfold from the outside. The absence of embarrassment, the absence of shame, the absence of that basic human instinct present in most of us at least occasionally to look at our own behavior and think quietly and privately that perhaps we have gone too far. Harry doesn't appear to have that instinct. Or if he does, it has been so thoroughly suppressed by years of therapy speak, self-justification, and the validation of an inner circle that depends on his continued belief in his own righteousness, that it no longer functions as it should. What functions in its place is something much darker. Something that looks remarkably like the behavior of a man who has mistaken his wounds for wisdom, his grievances for virtue, and his capacity for revenge for a form of justice. There is a particular kind of dangerous person in this world. Not dangerous in a physical sense, but dangerous in the way that only the privileged can be. The kind of person who has been handed every advantage, suffered genuine loss alongside it, constructed a narrative in which the loss justifies everything, and then weaponized that narrative to insulate themselves from accountability. Harry has been a grieving son. He has been a soldier. He has known real loss and real difficulty, and I would never minimize that. But grief is not a blank check. Loss is not a license. And the fact that Princess Diana died when Harry was 12 years old does not excuse what appears to be happening at Centerville in her name, because that is the other layer of this that nobody seems to want to talk about. Centerville was in part created as a tribute to Diana, as a continuation of her work, as proof that her legacy would live on not just in the affections of the public, but in the lives of the people she cared about most. The vulnerable, the sick, the forgotten. Diana spent the last years of her life sitting on the floors of hospital wards in Angola, holding the hands of landmine victims. She walked through minefields to make a point. She shook hands with AIDS patients at a time when people were afraid to touch them. She gave her time, her presence, her genuine human warmth to people who had nothing. And her son, the son who invokes her name most often, who keeps her memory closest to his public persona, who has built an entire second act around the idea that he is somehow her truest heir, that son appears to have used a charity bearing her spiritual fingerprints as an instrument of personal vengeance. Diana would be appalled. I don't say that lightly. I say it because every account we have of who Diana was as a human being, not as an icon, but as a person, suggests she had a radar for exactly this kind of behavior. She knew what it looked like when powerful people used charitable causes for self-serving ends. She had seen enough of it from the inside, and she spent the second half of her life trying to be the opposite of that. Her son has not followed her example. He has followed a much older and much less admirable royal tradition, the tradition of using position and influence to silence dissent, reward loyalty, and punish anyone who has the courage to say that the emperor has no clothes. Except in this case, the emperor is standing in front of a camera in California, wearing a cashmere sweater, talking about his feelings. And the people paying the price for his tantrums are some of the most vulnerable children on earth. There is also a broader conversation to be had here about what this says regarding Harry's fitness for any kind of public leadership role going forward, because he has not disappeared from public life. He still courts influence. He still attaches himself to causes. He still presents himself as a man of vision and compassion with something meaningful to offer the world. After Centerville, that claim deserves serious scrutiny. What organization, knowing what we now know, would hand Prince Harry a position of governance? What charity would invite him onto its board? What institution would welcome his involvement without first asking, very carefully, what happens to the people who disagree with him? What happens to the money when the relationships break down? What happens to the mission when the personal dynamics curdle? These are not hypothetical questions. They are questions with answers now. And those answers are not reassuring. The Charity Commission should be looking at Centerville with fresh eyes and significant urgency. Not as a formality, not as a box-ticking exercise, but as a genuine investigation into whether a registered charity has been governed in a manner consistent with its legal obligations and its stated purpose. Every financial record should be examined. Every board decision should be scrutinized. Every penny donated by ordinary people who believed they were helping children in Africa should be accounted for. And if those investigations reveal what the evidence increasingly suggests, that the charity's governance was compromised by personal dynamics, that financial transparency was sacrificed on the altar of ego, that Dr. Shandoka was removed for doing exactly what the law required of her, then the consequences should be proportionate, not proportionate to Harry's feelings, proportionate to the harm done to the children, to the donors, to Dr. Shandoka, and to the very concept of charitable giving, which depends above all else on public trust, because that is what is ultimately at stake in this story. Not Harry's reputation, though that is clearly in freefall, and no amount of carefully managed media appearances will arrest it at this point. Not Meghan's brand, not the Sussex narrative or the Sussex machine or whatever iteration of the Sussex project they are currently operating. What is at stake is trust. The trust that ordinary people place in charitable organizations when they donate their hard-earned money. The trust that vulnerable communities place in those who claim to be their advocates. The trust that board members like Dr. Sophie Shandoka must be able to extend to the organizations they serve. The trust that doing the right thing will not result in professional destruction. Prince Harry has broken that trust, comprehensively, callously, and apparently without remorse. He has shown us through his actions rather than his words, and his words, Lord knows, have been plentiful enough. Exactly who he is when the cameras stop rolling and the therapist isn't listening, and there is no opera in the room to reflect his best self back at him. He is a man who fires the people who ask questions. He is a man who withholds money from children to settle personal scores. He is a man who names a charity, Forget Me Not, and then forgets the children the moment his ego requires it. And he is a man who will continue to do all of this, all of it, behind a mask of progressive values and emotional authenticity and humanitarian concern, for as long as the world allows him to. The question is whether the world will keep allowing it. The signs suggest that patience is running out. The public goodwill that once surrounded Harry like a force field, built on the image of a bereaved boy, a brave soldier, a charming young prince, has been eroded so systematically, so thoroughly, that what remains is something closer to contempt. Not the contempt of people who never liked him. The contempt of people who did. People who wanted him to be who he said he was. People who gave him the benefit of the doubt, again and again, through the Netflix documentaries and the memoir and the interviews and the lawsuits and the endless, grinding, self-righteous campaign against an institution and a family that he left but cannot stop punishing. People who have finally, reluctantly, with something approaching sadness, concluded that the man is simply not who he claims to be. And Dr. Sophie Shandoka, accomplished, principled, courageous Dr. Sophie Shandoka, who asked the right questions and paid an unconscionable price for it, is the clearest proof yet that they are right. Forget Me Not, Harry named his charity. The world won't forget, not what you did to those children. Not what you did to that woman. Not what you have revealed about yourself through every choice you have made since the day you decided that your comfort mattered more than your duty. You will not forget. And we will keep watching, because the truth, as it always does, is making its way to the surface. And when it gets there, fully, completely, undeniably, there will be nowhere left to hide behind the language of healing and the aesthetics of compassion. Not the Africa of charity brochures and celebrity photo opportunities, though we will get to that, and it will not be flattering. The real Africa. Specifically, the Kingdom of Lesotho, a small landlocked nation entirely surrounded by South Africa, and one of the countries most severely affected by the HIV and AIDS epidemic. The statistics from Lesotho are not abstract. They are not comfortable reading. Adult HIV prevalence rates that rank among the highest in the world. Children orphaned in numbers that strain every social system the country possesses. Communities where illness and poverty have become so intertwined that separating one from the other is almost impossible. This is the context into which Prince Harry and Prince Siyaza of Lesotho stepped in 2006 when they co-founded Centerbail. And whatever we say about what the charity has become, and we will say quite a lot, it is only fair to acknowledge that the founding impulse was not cynical. Whatever was in Harry's heart when he stood in Lesotho and committed to building something for those children, it was not nothing. But good intentions are not governance. Good intentions do not pay salaries, build programs, or ensure that the money donated by a retired teacher in Manchester or a young professional in Toronto actually reaches a child in Maseru rather than disappearing into the administrative fog of a poorly run organization. Good governance does those things. In good governance, it appears, is precisely what Centerbail has been lacking. Enter Dr. Sophie Shandoka. Now I want to take a moment here because I think the way we talk about Dr. Shandorka matters enormously. There will be people, there already are people who want to frame her as a troublemaker, a disgruntled board member with a personal agenda, someone who couldn't get along with the team and is now, bitter and vindictive, airing her grievances in public. This framing is not only wrong. It is dangerous, it is the oldest silencing tactic in the world, and it is deployed with particular enthusiasm against women, and especially against women of color, who dare to challenge powerful men. You question her motives. You question her temperament. You subtly suggest that her concerns, however legitimate they might appear on the surface, are really just the expression of some personal failing, an inability to collaborate, a difficulty with authority, an axe ground from some private grievance that has nothing to do with the issues she's raising. It is a tactic designed to shift your attention from what she said to who she is. And once your attention has shifted, the powerful person gets to walk away clean. We are not going to allow that today. Dr. Sophie Shandorka is an accomplished woman who joined the board of Centerbale and did what board members are legally required to do. She examined the finances. She asked questions. She sought accountability for the stewardship of public donations. And when she did not receive satisfactory answers, she did not quietly look the other way. She persisted. For this, she was removed. Now, let us be appropriately precise about what we know from what we are inferring. The full picture of what happened inside Centerbale's boardroom is not available to the public, and I will not pretend otherwise. What we do know is that Dr. Shandorka raised financial concerns, that her relationship with the charity subsequently deteriorated, and that she is no longer on the board. We know that the timing and circumstances of her departure have raised serious questions among charity governance experts. And we know that the broader context, the culture of the organization, the personalities involved, the pattern of behavior that follows Prince Harry from institution to institution like a weather system, points toward conclusions that are difficult to avoid. The most obvious of those conclusions is this: Harry did not like being questioned. Harry has never liked being questioned. The entire second chapter of his public life, the memoirs, the documentaries, the interviews, the relentless media campaign against the royal family and the British press is a monument to his profound discomfort with being held to account. He cannot take it. He can write 400 pages about the failures of everyone around him, but the moment someone points a finger in his direction, the shutters come down and the lawyers come out. And in the case of Centerbale, it appears that the lawyers were not the only thing that came out. The firing came out too. Think about what that means in practical terms. A woman who was contributing her time, her expertise, her professional reputation, and her genuine commitment to African children's welfare was removed from her position. Not because she stole anything, not because she lied, not because she failed in her duties, but because she performed them too well, because she took the fiduciary responsibility of a board member seriously enough to follow the money and ask where it led. And the answer to that question, apparently, was something that someone did not want made public. That is not speculation. That is the logical inference from the sequence of events. If the finances were entirely in order, if there was nothing to hide, if every penny donated to Centerbale was being impeccably managed and directed toward the children it was meant to serve, then what precisely was the problem with Dr. Shandorka asking to see the records? There was no problem with the asking. There was a problem with what the asking might reveal, and that right there is the story within the story. The story that should be occupying the attention of charity regulators, investigative journalists, and every person who has ever dropped a donation into the Centerbale collection with the belief that it was going to help a child who needed it. Where is the money? It is a simple question. It should have a simple answer. And the fact that it apparently does not, the fact that asking it apparently carries consequences severe enough to cost a board member her position, suggests that the answer is considerably less simple than anyone would like. We are also, it should be noted, talking about reports that donations were withheld from Centerbale, not delayed, not redirected through a different administrative channel, withheld. As in, money that should have been going to children with HIV and AIDS in Southern Africa was instead being held back as a consequence of the personal and professional fallout surrounding Dr. Shandulkar's departure. I want to be very careful here, because the seriousness of this allegation demands precision. If it is true, and I emphasize if, because this remains a matter of ongoing scrutiny, then what we are describing is not merely a governance failure. It is not merely a charity scandal in the familiar, disappointing sense that we have come to expect from organizations that mix celebrity with philanthropy. It is something considerably worse than that. It is the deliberate withholding of resources from sick children for reasons of personal spite. It is using the welfare of the most vulnerable people on earth as collateral in a personal dispute. It is, in the most literal sense possible, punishing children for the sins of adults. And if Prince Harry was involved in that decision, if his influence, direct or indirect, contributed to the withholding of those donations, then there is no description of his behavior too severe to be accurate. Disgusting is the word that comes to mind most readily, and it is not a word I use carelessly. Let us also consider the specific cruelty of the target here, Lesotho, Botswana, children living with HIV and AIDS. Children who, through no fault of their own, were born into circumstances of grinding poverty and medical vulnerability that most of the people watching this video cannot even begin to imagine. Children for whom a charity like Centerbail is not a nice extra. It is a lifeline. And Prince Harry, who has, let us remember, a net worth estimated in the tens of millions, who lives in a mansion in Montecito, who travels by private jet and attends high-end events and commands six-figure speaking fees. Prince Harry apparently allowed personal grievance to compromise the welfare of those children. The contrast is so stark that it almost defies articulation. Almost, but not quite, because here is a man who has made his public identity out of sensitivity, out of awareness, out of the language of healing and growth and doing better and being better. He speaks about mental health with the earnestness of a convert. He speaks about his own struggles with the kind of raw, intimate candor that is clearly designed to make you feel that you are seeing the real him, the unguarded him, the him that exists beneath the title and the privilege and the complicated family history. And maybe some of that is real. I'm willing to concede that. Grief is real. Trauma is real. The difficulties of growing up in the peculiar fishbowl of the British royal family are real, even if the solutions Harry has chosen to those difficulties have been, to put it generously, imperfect. But here is what else is real: the choices he makes when the cameras are off, the decisions he takes when the only people watching are the ones inside the organization, the ones on the board, the ones asking the questions he doesn't want to answer. That is where character lives. Not in the opera interview, not in the Netflix documentary, where the lighting is perfect and the narrative is controlled, and every frame has been approved before it reaches your screen. Character lives in the boardroom. Character lives in what you do when someone asks to see the accounts. Character lives in whether you respond to legitimate scrutiny with transparency, or with the full force of whatever power you happen to hold over the person doing the scrutinizing. Prince Harry's character, measured by that standard, is not what he has advertised. It is something considerably smaller, considerably meaner, considerably more interested in self-preservation than in the welfare of the children whose faces appear on his charity's website. And this brings us to a question that I think deserves to be asked plainly. Why does Prince Harry still have a charity, not rhetorically, genuinely? Given what we now know, given the governance concerns, the financial questions, the circumstances surrounding Dr. Shandulkar's removal, the reports about withheld donations, why is Centerbail still operating under his influence? Why has there not been a more robust intervention from the Charity Commission? Why are major donors not demanding a full independent audit before committing another penny? These are questions for the regulators, but they are also questions for all of us. Because the charitable sector depends on public trust. It depends on the confidence of donors that their money is being used for the purpose they intended. And when that confidence is eroded, when the gap between the charity's stated mission and its actual governance becomes too wide to ignore, the damage extends far beyond one organization. it damages the entire ecosystem of charitable giving. Every person who reads about centre-bail and concludes that charity is not what it claims to be is a person who might think twice the next time they are asked to donate. And that hesitation, multiplied across thousands of donors, has real consequences for real organizations doing real work with genuinely vulnerable people. Harry's behavior, in other words, is not just damaging to the children of Lesotho and Botswana. It is damaging to the broader culture of charitable giving that those children, and millions like them, depend upon. He almost certainly hasn't thought about that, because thinking about that would require looking beyond himself. And looking beyond himself is not something that the evidence suggests Prince Harry does with any great frequency or comfort. What he does with great frequency and comfort is construct narratives. Beautiful, internally consistent, emotionally compelling narratives in which he is always the protagonist, always the one who suffered, always the one who acted from the purest of motives while everyone around him fell short. He did it with the royal family. He did it with the British press. He is doing it now in whatever version of events the Sussex communications team is preparing to release in response to the Shandoka story, and the narrative will be slick, it will be sympathetic. It will contain enough emotional truth, enough genuine pain, enough real complexity to give cover to the people who want to believe it, who want to believe in Harry, who have invested enough in the idea of Harry as a good man trying to do good things that the alternative is too uncomfortable to sit with. I understand that impulse. I genuinely do, but at some point, and I would argue that point is now, that this story represents that point, the narrative has to yield to the evidence. And the evidence says this: a competent, principled woman tried to hold a charity accountable. She was removed. Donations that should have gone to sick children may have been withheld. And the man at the center of it all is not a misunderstood humanitarian. He is not a wounded healer doing his best in impossible circumstances. He is a man who is using the language of compassion to mask the behavior of a tyrant. A small tyrant, to be sure. One whose domain is a charity and a media operation rather than a kingdom. But a tyrant nonetheless, in the sense that he brooks no challenge, tolerates no accountability, and ensures that anyone who dares to question him pays a price commensurate with his capacity to inflict one. And his capacity, given his wealth, his connections, his platform, and his demonstrated willingness to use all three without restraint, is not inconsiderable. Dr. Shandoka has already felt it. Others, no doubt, will feel it in the future, because the centre-bail situation is not an anomaly. It is a data point in a pattern that has been accumulating for years. Every person who has worked closely with the Sussexes and subsequently found themselves on the outside, every aide, every assistant, every collaborator who entered that world with enthusiasm and left it with scars. The pattern is the message. And the message is this: Prince Harry is not who he says he is. He is not a champion of transparency. He is not a voice for the voiceless. He is not the living continuation of his mother's compassionate legacy. He is a man of immense privilege who has mistaken his grievances for righteousness, his instinct for revenge for a sense of justice, and his capacity to control the narrative for actual accountability. Diana sat on hospital floors. Harry fires board members for checking the books. The contrast does not require elaboration. What it requires is action. Specifically, the kind of regulatory action that protects the charitable sector from being exploited by those with power and platform. The kind of journalistic scrutiny that follows the money regardless of whose name is attached to the organization. The kind of public pressure that makes it impossible for anyone, prince or pauper, to hide behind the language of charity while behaving in ways that betray its most fundamental purpose. And it requires something else too. It requires us to hold in our minds the image of a child in Lesotho. Not a symbolic child, a real one. A child who wakes up in the morning in a community where HIV has taken parents, siblings, futures. A child for whom the programs funded by a charity like Centrebail are not an abstraction. They are medicine, they are counseling. They are the difference between a life with possibility and a life without it. That child did not choose to be caught in the crossfire of a prince's ego. That child did not ask to become collateral damage in a feud between a self-styled humanitarian and the board member who had the courage to ask where the money was going. That child simply needs what was promised to them. And Prince Harry, who named his charity Forget-Me-Not, appears to have forgotten them entirely. The world, however, is not forgetting. The questions are not going away. The scrutiny is not diminishing. And with every new revelation, with every new data point in the pattern of Harry's behavior, the distance between the man he claims to be and the man the evidence reveals grows wider and more impossible to bridge. There will be a response, of course. There always is. A carefully worded statement, a sympathetic profile somewhere. Perhaps another interview, another moment of performed vulnerability, designed to remind you that Harry has feelings and therefore cannot be held responsible for his actions in quite the same way as people who have fewer feelings and fewer millions in the bank. Do not be moved by it. Be moved instead by Dr. Sophie Shandorka, who did the right thing. Be moved by the children of Lesotho and Botswana, who never had a choice. Be moved by the donors who gave in good faith and deserve to know what their money actually did. And be deeply, lastingly, productively angry at the man who had everything. The name, the platform, the resources, the genuine opportunity to do something meaningful with a life that most people can only dream of, and chose instead to spend it on revenge. Forget-me-not, we won't, Harry, we won't forget any of it.